There's often a vacuum of news during international breaks. No, not that type of vacuum, David. With a lack of club football to talk about, newspapers and websites start publishing long reads about how Terry Venables' controversial business dealings prevented him from landing the England job long term, and which English football stadiums will be underwater by 2050. Podcasts and YouTube channels start uploading episodes, ranking every Premier League left-back based upon how good they'd be at cooking an omelette. Cucurella takes it every time, let's be honest. And social media accounts spend the week posting things like, "Who remembers El Hadji Diouf?" Like some kind of underwhelming, football-based Peter Kay stand-up routine. We have David Coote to thank, therefore, for the start of the third international break of the season being a little bit more entertaining. In fact, in England at least, I'm not sure that there has been a single story from the world of football which has captured the public's imagination more than this one this season. Early on Monday afternoon, a Liverpool fan with a small social media following shared a post which they had captioned, "David Coote, ladies and gentlemen." End quote. The post contained 2 videos of Premier League referee David Coote, seemingly intoxicated, sitting alongside an unidentified man recording him on his phone. In the first video, Coote described Liverpool as having played shit during a game in which he had been the 4th official and repeatedly used a swear word to describe Jurgen Klopp. I think that YouTube have relaxed their censorship rules in recent years, so I should be alright to say it, but it is widely considered to be among the harshest of all of the naughty words. He called him a He called him an absolute and a German Oh, alright, forget it. Apparently not. Anyway, it starts with a C, ends in unt. It is a term of endearment in Australia and considered to be more offensive than carrying out a drive-by shooting in America. The second video, meanwhile, I can show you that one.
Right, just to be clear, that fucking last video can't go anywhere. Seriously.
It can.
He's a Premier League referee. Let's not fucking ruin his career. Like, let's face it, we're good blokes.
Are you though?
But we can't ruin a bloke's career.
See, it seems like you can.
But we're not that bad.
Kinda seems like you might be.
Also, he's a fucking legend.
So yeah.
So let's not ruin his.
That post of those 2 videos has been viewed 57 million times, which is almost exactly the population of England. And before we had even had time to fully digest it, a second video dropped online.
60 on page 150.
Mr. President, a second David Coote video has hit the internet. The second video, released by The Sun, appeared to show Coote snorting a white powdered substance, which some people, brace yourselves, have alleged might have been cocaine. Personally, I choose to believe that it was a potentially lethal cocktail of icing sugar and mustard powder. Too much of that stuff will really get up your nose, but I suppose we can't rule it out. Nonetheless, nicknaming him Pablo Escobar at this early stage, as some people have done, seems to me to be a little premature. With all of that in mind, Mike Dean describing Coote as, and I quote, "one of the quieter referees out of the group," somewhat begs the question, what must the rest of them be up to? One can only assume that Darren England keeps a collection of exotic animals who he trains to attack unwitting trespassers at his ranch in Texas during the off-season. Michael Oliver spends his free time having bunga bunga parties with former allies of Silvio Berlusconi and Colonel Gaddafi. And Keith Stroud goes home from games to a pile of cocaine bigger than Al Pacino's in Scarface before ritualistically roaming the countryside and slashing cows with Bobby Madley. I want to be absolutely clear that all of those were jokes, satirising Mike Dean's comments that David Coote is one of the Premier League's quieter referees. I have zero reason to believe that Darren England trains any exotic animals to attack trespassers, Michael Oliver is any kind of sexual deviant, or that Keith Stroud or Bobby Madley have ever inflicted any harm whatsoever on any farmyard animals. Of course, I can't prove that they don't either, but it seems extremely unlikely, and they were all jokes. It can be important to make these kinds of things clear for legal reasons. The last thing I want is to get banged up in a cell next to Stokey G2 off Twitter. I can say that a group of Premier League referees, Martin Atkinson, Andre Mariner, Kevin Friend, and David Coote, were pictured on a night out with what the Daily Mail described as, quote, young women on the Indonesian island of Batam in 2019, but The Sun was at pains to point out, after describing Batam as, quote, a sex tourist destination infamous for its red light district, that, and again, I quote, it is not suggested the women the refs met were sex workers, nor that they, or the refs, did anything illegal. End quote. Good of them to make that clarification. Incidentally, Coote was the only ref on that trip that wasn't married, so he came out of that incident the least scathed among those referees, but I digress. I'd actually already started writing this script. Yes, I know. This is scripted, it's hard to believe but it's true, about the Liverpool and Klopp video before the white powder video dropped, and it would seem as though someone somewhere has some dirt on David Coote, a real axe to grind, and is drip-feeding compromising content involving referees to the press and online. Heck, by the time that I've finished recording this, someone will probably have released a video of Anthony Taylor in a gimp suit being fed chocolate-covered strawberries by a member of ISIS, and the whole David Coote called Klopp a and alleged cocaine consumption thing will seem like old news. If you are now imagining Anthony Taylor in a gimp suit, I can only apologise. Please try to scrub that from your mind, permanently, if possible, both so that we can move on with the rest of the video now, but also because I don't want to be held responsible for a mental health crisis if I've etched that into enough people's minds. Clearly, we're going to have to circle back round to snorting at some stage, just like on any good night out, but I am going to start by talking about the first two videos, as I had initially planned, because they are still arguably actually more important than the second one, which is just more scandalous if anything. First things first, it is worth clarifying what David Coote actually said and did. When asked, quote, what did you think of the Liverpool game earlier when you were fourth official? Coote replies, Liverpool were shit. To which the person recording the video and talking to Coote follows up by asking him what he thinks of Jurgen Klopp. It's at that point that Coote drops the C-bomb in relation to Klopp, not once, not twice, but 3 times. It would appear he really doesn't like Jurgen Klopp. That is pretty much the crux of what happened in that first video, and we will get into how bad that is, whether it constitutes a sacking offence in of itself, and whether it has been either under or overblown. But first, since I have seen so many either deliberate or accidental misunderstandings, it is equally worthwhile clarifying what Coote didn't say. He didn't, as some people have claimed, call Liverpool a shit club, or even say that he thinks they are shit in general, which might seem like a pedantic point of contention, but I would wager that almost all of us have said every club, including, and in fact, probably especially our own, have played badly in a specific game. As a Hull City fan, I know that I find myself saying it on a disappointingly frequent basis, whereas describing a club as a whole in those terms would suggest a fundamental ill will towards them rather than a judgment on a performance. I might say that England or Hull City played bad fairly often, but I wouldn't say that they are bad necessarily. Well, there probably are occasions in which I have or would say that, which perhaps makes me more prejudiced against the two teams that I actually support than we have any evidence that David Coote is prejudiced against Liverpool, which I suppose is somewhat illustrative of the point. I've also seen a lot of people claim that Coote said that he hates Scousers, which also is untrue. The person recording the video, we'll just call him Grass1 for the sake of argument, makes the claim that we hate Scousers right at the very end of the video, but Coote himself makes no such claim, and while you could perhaps make the case that by not voicing any opposition to that claim, especially after the use of the word we, implicates Coote by default, the video literally ends the second that that bloke says that, so for all we know, and however unlikely, and I would accept that it is quite, he could have immediately said, I don't hate Scousers. And last but not least, at no point does David Coote state, or even remotely suggest, that he has officiated Liverpool games differently or partially because he thinks that they played badly in a game where he was a fourth official, or because he dislikes Jurgen Klopp. It is of course possible to find examples of contentious decisions that went against Liverpool in games where Coote was officiating, pair that with his disparaging remarks about Jurgen Klopp and their performance in a game, and cry foul. In fact, Scrap possible there, that is exactly what several 100,000 Liverpool fans and indeed supporters of many other clubs immediately did. There was a penalty that Liverpool felt that they should have had for an alleged foul on Andy Robertson, the alleged Martin Ødegaard handball in the box that also wasn't given, and the non-red card for Jordan Pickford's challenge, which ruptured Virgil van Dijk's ACL. As far as some people are concerned, that is clear and obvious evidence, if you'll pardon the pun, of anti-Liverpool bias on David Coote's part. It is possible, of course, that they're right. David Coote might actually hate Liverpool, he might be desperate for them to lose games, and he might deliberately give decisions against them for that exact reason. It's possible. I don't think that it is probable, but it is possible. More likely, might I suggest, is the fact that a lot of referees will have fractured relationships with managers, which goes both ways. They will almost all have opinions on how teams they officiated played in games. Most of them are football fans, that's typically how and why they became involved in refereeing in the first place, and most of them are able to separate any personal ill will that they may bear towards a player or coach and how they officiate games. Some of you may be familiar with Hanlon's razor, an old adage which states, quote, "Never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity." David Coote getting steaming drunk on a night out, and maybe a little bit more than drunk, seemingly going back to some stranger's house for afters, and allowing them to film him making incendiary comments about a club and their manager, I would contest, is far better explained as an act of gross stupidity than it is evidence of a grand conspiracy or of any serious malice. The reality is, and I don't even think that this should necessarily be viewed as a negative, every single referee, in every single league and every single country, will have said that a team played badly in a game and called a manager some very unpleasant things. To be clear, this is hardly a one-way street. Barely a week passes by in which a Premier League referee isn't on the end of an accusation, or at least an insinuation, of either incompetence or malevolence. Christ. Alex Ferguson accused Alan Wiley of being unfit back in 2009. Jose Mourinho literally called Mike Dean an idiot in 2020, in a public press conference no less, not while he was smashed sat on some bloke's sofa after a night out. Meanwhile, Arsene Wenger branded Dean a disgrace. He has been through the ringer, hasn't he, poor old Mike Dean? Ian Holloway also called him useless in 2010. Neil Warnock once chased Mike Riley around a car park, which is arguably worse than calling someone a rude name. Meanwhile, the whole Manchester United team chased Andy D'Urso the full length of Old Trafford after he gave a rare penalty against them, for which Roy Keane was forced to apologise but still routinely jokes about. Neil Warnock also once claimed that Cardiff City's Premier League opponents didn't matter, it was who had the flag and who was refereeing that mattered. Alan Pardew literally pushed a linesman during a Newcastle game, a couple of years before he headbutted David Marler on the touchline. Steve Evans is another repeat offender, unsurprisingly. Gary Monk said that it was, quote, disgusting that Michael Oliver gave a penalty against his team in 2014. And, of course, Nottingham Forest released a statement claiming, quote, the VAR is a Luton fan, but they didn't change him, referring to Stuart Atwell last season, adding, quote, our patience has been tested multiple times. End quote. Oh, and of course, who could forget Nigel Pearson calling poor old Mike Dean arrogant?
Speak to the referee then, will you have a chat with him?
What's the point? What is the point of talking to him? He's one of the most arrogant men I've ever met.
I could keep going, and I'm not remotely exaggerating, for about 45 minutes. In that context, is it really that surprising that some officials might have unfavourable views about some managers, just as some managers have unfavourable views about some officials? So long as it doesn't impact upon how they officiate games, and again, we don't currently have any evidence to suggest that it has, certainly not in relation to David Coote, it's not just not a big deal, it is inevitable, perfectly normal, and evidence, contrary to what people often suggest, that referees are human beings just like everyone else in football. Now, to be absolutely clear, none of this is a defence of David Coote, it is just important points of context and clarification, nor am I remotely suggesting that he has done nothing wrong. While we probably shouldn't attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't recognise stupidity, especially when it is so brazen. In an environment where referees face relentless scrutiny and abuse, you might say that David Coote is a product of that environment, but he has also now contributed to it and added fuel to the fire of conspiracy theorists. All referees may criticise teams' performances and insult managers, but they don't all do it on camera after a night out, and in doing so, David Coote has almost certainly, aside from anything else, destroyed his career at the age of 42. Even if you could forgive all of the stupidity, Coote didn't just call Jurgen Klopp the C-word. The third time that he did so, he called him a German C-word, and as per the precedent set out by the Football Association, that constitutes racist abuse from which there can be no return for a referee, or not in this country at least. One of the responses that I saw to the initial Coote video dropping was this tweet from @Handerverzil, in which the author declares that the PGMOL has until 8 PM to liquidate. I'm not quite sure what leverage he's got to make that kind of threat. Maybe an armed militia ready and waiting to storm their headquarters, or a series of elaborate booby traps set up at referee training facilities. Either way, that was a few days ago. The PGMOL hasn't liquidated, and I am as yet unaware of @Handerverzil having brought any consequences upon them. And the tweet goes on to call for Premier League referees to be replaced by European referees. Premier League referees are European referees, of course. England is in Europe, and the English FA, and by extension the Premier League, are UEFA members, but maybe that point is actually pedantry. We all know what they mean. They mean referees from mainland Europe, countries like Greece, Hungary, and Spain, where, famously of course, referees are never criticised, there are no controversial refereeing decisions, and supporters never accuse referees of being biased or corrupt. Oh no, wait. Yeah, that's right, isn't it? What I would give to see this suggestion put into action. Please, if you're watching this, Premier League officials, even if it's just for one weekend, put Premier League referees on gardening leave and bring in someone like Antonio Mateo Lahuz out of retirement to referee a high-profile Premier League fixture. I want to see the reaction from people who, I can only presume, never watch any European football outside of the Premier League, to some of the continent's more colourful officials taking charge of their team's games. How long do you think it would take for there to be a controversial decision and a referee accused of corruption? Hang on a minute. Antonio Mateo Lahuz is Spanish. Julen Lopetegui is also Spanish. He's just given West Ham a penalty against Manchester United. Manchester United are managed by Ruben Amorim, who is Portuguese. The Spanish have a well-known rivalry with the Portuguese. This is blatant corruption. How on earth was he allowed to referee this game? My guess is that it would take all of about 7 minutes. Okay, I suppose it's time that we address the second video now, otherwise known as the white powder video. If Coote's career wasn't already finished, thanks to the German C-bomb comments, then it was after this follow-up was released. The most concerning aspect of all of this, if it is corruption and the game being brought into disrepute that you are genuinely worried about, isn't Coote's comments about Liverpool or about Klopp, or even the fact that he snorted some white powder. It is that these clips exist, and possibly others like it, who knows, and have existed for a while. The Klopp one is years old, dating back to lockdown, possibly to 2020 it seems. Meanwhile, the white powder one is reportedly from during Euro 2024, with The Sun citing July 6th as the date, a day after Coote was the fourth official for the quarter-final between the host nation Germany and the eventual winners Spain. The fact that someone was sat on those videos and only chose to release them now opens up the possibility that the threat of their release could have been used as some kind of leverage or bargaining chip in order to influence David Coote's officiating of games. Again, there is absolutely no evidence to suggest that is the case, or that any such threats were ever made. I want to be very clear about that. But out of all of the imagined or potential risks to the integrity of the game that could theoretically exist, that would appear to me to be the most credible or coherent. I still think it's pretty unlikely, and it would require some solid evidence to be proven, but it is the most coherent argument, I think. So that is a potential concern. As a slight tangent, I know it's not like me, is it? I do find the issue of referees taking drugs, and particularly performance-enhancing drugs, to be an interesting moral question. FIFA introduced a ban on referees taking performance-enhancing drugs and introduced tests in 2012. But it's a bit of a funny one, isn't it? The argument against players taking performance-enhancing drugs is obvious. It's cheating and giving their team an unfair advantage against presumably clean athletes competing within the spirit and the rules of the game against them. It's abominable, and it undermines the entire premise of fair play, upon which all sport surely depends. But referees? I mean, if a ref is roided up to their eyeballs, who is that affording an unfair advantage? Other referees, I suppose, who couldn't hope to keep up with these superhuman referees running 20 miles every game, just jogging past Kyle Walker and Adama Traore, who are running at full pace to keep up with the counter-attack. But hey, if it gets results, some might say, scrap VAR, it's a complicated mess. Just get referees pumped full of HGH, EPO, and amphetamines. You'll have them charging around the pitch like hyper-focused and super fit cyborgs in no time. There are probably some unintended consequences that I'm not considering, but surely it's got to be worth the trial at the Under-17 World Cup or something. Alright. I am joking, of course. I don't recommend that anyone take any drugs, just to get that on the record, unless they are prescribed or whatever. I mean, please just don't take any medical advice from me. I'm not even properly qualified to do this job. It's just an interesting ethical alleyway to get lost down. I think that it is probably best if everyone in professional sport is clean, even if it would be fun to see it trialled with a load of mashed up refs off their face on drugs at a youth tournament. You could stick them all on different drugs, couldn't you? Growth hormones, amphetamines, cannabis, and then grade their performance and see which increases or decreases performance levels the most. I am going to wager that the referee on acid isn't going to perform the best. Maybe the most amusing, but probably not the best. But then, how will we know until we run the trial? Okay, again, I'm being daft for comic effect. Referees shouldn't do drugs, and if you are caught snorting something on video, and someone sends it to The Sun, a far worse crime in my humble opinion, you are going to be in big trouble. But again, we ought to draw a clear line between stupidity and, I suppose, illegality, versus corruption and the actual rigging of games. As I've talked about a few times on this channel, football has become incredibly conspiratorial in recent years. Every team seems to think that referees, the authorities, and, I don't know, Bill Gates are out to get them. No supporter ever seems to think that their team gets the rub of the green from referees, and lots of favourable decisions. They're only ever robbed and on the receiving end of injustices. Howard Webb recently mentioned on The Overlap that when he met with representatives of 17 out of the 20 Premier League teams before the start of this season, they all told him, without fail, that they never get the 50-50 decisions. It somewhat begs the question, well, who does then? The unusual thing is that the most compelling evidence of referees officiating teams differently, like Mark Clattenburg stating of Jurgen Klopp, quote, "He is wrong to suggest there is an aura around United that sees them given favourable decisions. There used to be when Fergie was there, but that has eased massively since he left. I am the only referee to give 3 penalties to the opposition at Old Trafford, and that was for Liverpool, of all teams, in 2014. But David Moyes was manager. I'm not sure that would have happened when Fergie was there," end quote. Or Danny Simpson's claim that Clattenburg told a Leicester City player during their remarkable title-winning campaign that he should have sent them off but he wanted them to win the league. They are rarely actually cited or get a lot less attention than some kind of bizarre tangential link or nonsense claim like Jared Gillett was once shat on by a seagull and therefore he refuses to give Brighton any decisions. It's all a bit odd. I also think that a lot of it comes down to a fundamental misunderstanding of how refereeing actually works. Referees don't decide to take up refereeing, ref a few games, and then, all of a sudden, they're officiating an FA Cup final. It takes years, and the only way to get to the top is to be deemed to have refereed games fairly and competently over a consistent period of time. Referees are scored at virtually every level of the game by both teams, and those referees who score best are promoted, while those who don't stay where they are, or could even be relegated, not unlike players or certainly clubs at least. David Coote started refereeing when he was only 16 years old. He refereed in the Notts Alliance League, the Northern Counties East Football League, the Northern Premier League, the Conference North, and then finally the Conference, now the National League, before he was promoted to the Football League, now the EFL, aged 28. So by that stage, he had already been refereeing for 12 years. It took another 8 years climbing up through the EFL before Coote was promoted to officiate his first Premier League game in 2018, aged 36. That is the typical path of a Premier League referee. They don't just get there by accident. I think people also tend to forget that, for referees, just like players, this is their jobs, their careers, their entire livelihoods. Just as a footballer might grow up supporting one club, their priority is always themselves and their careers, and if they leave their boyhood club and then play against them, it is pretty unlikely that they are going to deliberately play badly or stick a few goals in their own net. Likewise, even if a referee dislikes a team or a coach, maybe he or she feels that they have been particularly rude or disrespectful towards them, they are pretty unlikely to let that impact how they officiate them, because they want to perform well, get promoted, earn more money, and officiate the biggest games. I remember when I was about 11 or maybe 12 years old, and Hull City were in contention to win a historic first ever promotion to the Premier League. It was the 2007-08 season, and at a family meal, my dad was bemoaning the fact that he'd just been caught speeding. It wasn't the first time. He drove a lot from Yorkshire to London once or twice a week, and much too quickly, and he was only 1 or maybe 2 incidents away from receiving a year-long driving ban. So at that meal, I thought that it would be the dilemma of all dilemmas to pose the question: if you had to pick between a year-long driving ban and Hull City winning promotion, or not getting banned from driving but Hull City don't go to the Premier League, which one would you pick? 12-year-old Alfie thought he would be stumped. Hull City, in the Premier League, it was the previously unimaginable dream that we had been obsessing about throughout our meteoric rise from the 4th Division over the previous 4 years. What could possibly be bigger than that? I still remember my dad looking at me like I was a complete idiot and saying, well, I couldn't do my job if I couldn't drive. It was a stupid question, really. He was a bus driver. No, he wasn't actually. I am being hilarious again, but it was a stupid question. To him, football was important, but not more important than his actual livelihood. And I think that it is a childish way of thinking, like 12-year-old Alfie, to imagine that players or referees would put their personal views of clubs, players or coaches ahead of their careers. It's also just practically speaking pretty much impossible, or at least incredibly difficult, to actually be corrupt as a Premier League referee. There are millions of people watching every game, constant scrutiny, cameras covering every incident from about 5,000 different angles. There is VAR which will intervene if you were to attempt to give any truly significant and obviously incorrect decisions. And ultimately, if you were to unjustly award or penalise teams and somehow get away with all of that, just on the basis of your consistently poor performances and poor scoring, you would no longer be allowed to referee games, at least at the highest level. For a significant refereeing conspiracy to be successful, therefore, you would need all of the other officials to be equally corrupt and aligned on your corruption. You would need to only wield that corruption when it was plausible to get away with it, and, again, you'd actually need all of the clubs themselves to be in on your corruption and consistently rank you highly enough that you didn't lose your job or get demoted. Sometimes I wish that people would watch leagues that are blighted by legitimate refereeing corruption allegations, some of them actually proven, and see just how ridiculous and obvious it is compared to what gets branded as corruption in the Premier League, which is often just a 60-40 decision that even 3 pundits sat in a studio or a couple of fans inside of a pub can't agree on. I mean, as soon as the David Coote video dropped, I saw a graphic circulating on social media showing that Liverpool only had the 2nd highest win percentage of any team in games officiated on by David Coote, and that, apparently, was evidence of his corruption. Look, I get it. If you're a Liverpool fan, a referee saying that you played badly in a game while smashed at an afters and calling your manager every name under the sun, or actually just one name really, wasn't it, but not a very generous one, it looks bad and you're bound to be annoyed. But Hard as it may be to separate the two, it remains unlikely that he deliberately robbed Liverpool, or anyone else, of decisions as a result. Before I finish, I just want to make sure that none of you are still thinking about Anthony Taylor in a gimp suit. I really cannot emphasise enough that your abiding memory of this video should not be Anthony Taylor in a gimp suit. That would be extremely regrettable. Now, in all seriousness, the David Coote fiasco, for want of a better term, is damaging to the Premier League, to referees, and, most of all, inevitably, to David Coote, who has received an almost unprecedented spotlight for a referee at a time in which his career looks certain to come to an abrupt end, and we may not even be done yet. As I say, this is a very quickly moving story. There have also been far more serious allegations made against David Coote, but at the time of this recording, they are entirely unsubstantiated, and it would be inappropriate and improper for me to even allude to what they are. I mention them only because otherwise there would be those asking why I didn't in the comments, and the reason is a fairly straightforward one. That is it for today's video, seeing as though I need to draft an email to Gianni Infantino about my brilliant idea regarding a trial of refs on drugs at a tournament. I reckon if I suggest hosting it in Saudi Arabia, and he gets enough of the proceeds, he might just say yes. Thank you all very much, as ever, for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed today's video. Hope that was the case. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and of course, it goes without saying, make sure that you're subscribed and have notifications turned on not just for this channel, HITC Sevens, but also my second channel, Alfie Potsama, both of which should be about to appear on your screens now. And you can also find me on Twitter, for now, Instagram and Threads via the username at HITC Sevens on those three. And I also just created a Blue Sky, or whatever the hell it's called, where my username is alfiepotsama. Whatever it is. Should be easy enough to find. I'll put them all down below in the video description. Thanks again, have a fantastic day, and I'll see you all soon.